The will to power as the university. So I mentioned a number of times this example, paraphrasing Jacques Derrida, that the professors create the disciples, as just as in the medieval universities, the disciples would have been um, protectors of Christianity in the form of the Catholic or Protestant form. But we haven't looked too deeply into what does that mean. So let's think about it for a moment in some detail as an example of Will Zermatt or will to power. So the basic idea of will to power, I always say, is I could go to Bertold Niebuhr's statement, who was apparently had visited the Pope, or was even at the Papal Palace when he jotted down some notes, which later Nietzsche came across, to the effect that the wisest men of our own time still haven't perceived what history is good for, which is one and only one thing: to make us aware of how haphazard the forms that we live by are, and their ghosting upon us. So there's a professor, let's just give it an example. There's a professor who's all into the now school, and then he has a large number of PhD students. Let's superimpose at the same time, think of a technical subject, because maybe that's easier, where there's some research that needs to be done. But in any case, it to some extent it works the same way in the field, like history understood as a historiology, or as these different varying. Let's say the PhD students. There's more than one. Okay, they're competing. They have an advisor. This old guy that's into some form of analysis school, some very specific issues. Then he has a team of people that he could use as sort of dummies, however he wants. Say, oh, go, turn up this rock and smell and see what's there, and then lick around. And so then, let's say there's 10 of them or so. You see how this already works. He could send some off on a wild goose chase, and then almost assure that they're will not sort of emulate the credentials of an interesting, adventuresome CV, as it were, or they won't have the citations. This means already you have this little fiefdom of the form. So in connection to the sense that we randomly come across the forms that we're faced with, but people haven't quite realized how powerful that is. You have some professor that's into the analysis school, and then he's into some very specific questions about somehow, say he's into the question of how does one bridge the terrible gap between structure and immediate arriveness in Heidegger. And so he has some of these students who are history students spending a lot of time studying Heidegger. Now, supposing they're getting to the end of their PhD program, they may very well have wasted their time entirely if this same guy that's setting them in the wrong direction doesn't think that they deserve to get this credential. So you have little fiefdoms where people are being directed towards being created after a certain pattern in a way that can never be shown to be illegitimate, because there's Any other method would be more or less just as objectionable from other avenues, from other perspectives. So you have this prospect on a situation where all unknowing this professor is doing that, but then suppose he's read some Nietzsche, and Nietzsche's after all very even though usually in a blanched and unnoticed way everywhere, but there could be some professors that sort of see it in this light, in the light of this Rousseauian Hegelian problem of the changes of Geist, of the changes of the volonté générale. Generality is it? The so-called general will. There's I don't know. There's some people interpret the general will in order to say, sort of like that you will merely be made to be happy means that you'll be forced to go along with the general will no matter how bad it is. I'm not totally sure. My native sort of interpretation of it is to say that what he was thinking is the same thing as what Kant took over, which is to say the idea is something like the cauldron, the dark cauldron of the optimism view, that if you, or the, Kant and was ist Aufklärung, and what is enlightenment, says you have to go hearken, you have to hear your master's voice, but at the same time you can argue with your master. You don't have to simply obey like as though he were Tony Soprano or something. Christopher taking order for Tony Soprano. No, you could argue, you could have discussion, but at the end of the day, you have to hearken to the master's voice. That's the so-called wager of free speech. I think maybe, Rousseau is more, his idea is the stragglers will come over to the correct view, and the correct view will come out. I don't know. It's not clear to me actually. But I guess the point is, this becomes more clarified in Hegel, and then it's sort of like whatever the common sense is, or the most prevalent view becomes the zeitgeist or the Zeitalter, depending on how you look at it, and maybe those two words named the same thing from different. I don't think maybe Hegel doesn't actually use the word Zeitalter. Maybe Schelling uses the word Zeitalter, I'm not sure. But in any case, there's something like the general will, which Descartes in his so-called wisdom has put on against over and against the Newtonian system, over and against, which didn't exist when he was theorizing, or which he wasn't theorizing for that reason, but which which he was in totally coincides with his basically the view of motion. It can be connected to mathematics, and then through the Cartesian grid, which allows for this Al-Ghazami's solving for unknowns to be connected up to corporeal bodies, or otherwise known as three-dimensional geometric bodies. That there's perfect mathematical connection to all this stuff is the Cartesian idea of the real thing. So, you have this situation with Rousseau, and then let's just leave it at that note of all these forces there are different ways we could interpret why the professors are doing what they're doing. Will to power would be sort of being a being's way to understand what they're doing. Like, so we could understand, why is this professor have this tribe to um, sort of create this little fiefdom and then tell people to go here, there, and some of them will be ruined and won't even ever. Their studies will be wasted, and they won't get the credential, um, which creates a sinister situation in a soapbox to some minor extent. But instead, you would have a situation where we could ask. Yeah, we could ask in terms of Newtonian terms, like, why is he doing this? Why is his motion like? Why is the motion of his body like this? But then we could also ask and if we ask in sort of experimental psychology terms, which sort of in a way try to match our outcomes to something like Newtonian physics, more calculable, but our concepts are a little bit different because they're drawn from human life rather than from sheer motion. Or from the basic motion of material. Why is this wicked analysis school devoted to specific problems of how to bridge the longue durée with the immediate event of history? And then he strikes on a Heideggerian path to try to solve the problem. It's something like that. And then you have this guy that's into all this stuff. You don't try to solve the question of why he's doing it through physics. Instead, Descartes says there's this thing called thinking, and even though it overlays everything exactly, it's supposed to operate on will. It's supposed to operate on, we could will to do things, we could doubt, we could understand, we could not understand, we could be perplexed. But then again, all these things could be said of somebody who's moving, which is the main sort of like moving and having a shape is the main quality of his first category of the which he calls sort of confusingly extended category, but it really means sort of basically moving things, where then there's a suggestive difference between things that are taking in senses and therefore can have something else to decide how we determine their movement, and inanimate things. So maybe physics only goes up to the things that don't have this kind of feedback loop, this kind of cybernetic loop, if you want, between the which the eyes do, among other things, and also apparently the psyche or the soul does. So complex questions arise as to why the particular professor would be doing that, if he's stealing his students' work, if maybe he's getting kickbacks from some company if it's a technical issue, who knows. But it's interesting, I thought, just to take a quick look at how this academic power structure, or sort of sustaining and potential structures, are surely amenable to Nietzschean and Heideggerian investigation.